Alex, I spent 3 hours yesterday trying to find a specific rasp that I knew for a fact was sitting right on the corner of the anvil. Turns out I'd actually used it as a shim to level a table I was working on 3 weeks ago. My brain is basically just a soup of metal shavings and old Grateful Dead lyrics at this point.
At least the table is level, Tiger. I'd be more worried if you'd accidentally forged the rasp into the table. But hey, speaking of metal shavings and questionable life choices, we're diving into the deep end today. We're talking knife making, specifically the great divide between stock removal and forging.
It's the ultimate choose your own adventure for people who like Sharpies and sparks. You've got the precision of the surgeon on one side and the chaotic energy of a caveman with a heat source on the other.
And you, my friend, definitely lean toward the caveman side of that spectrum. But for the folks listening who might just be getting their feet wet, let's start with the cleaner version, stock removal. It's basically just taking a nice, flat piece of steel and bullying it until it looks like a knife, right?
That's a pretty fair assessment. Stock removal is like sculpting, but the stakes are higher because the material doesn't forgive. You buy a bar of steel from a mill, maybe something like 1095 high carbon or a nice stainless, and it arrives perfectly flat, annealed, and ready to be carved. You're essentially paying the mill to do all the heavy lifting I usually do with a hammer.
It sounds almost civilized. You draw your pattern, you cut it out, and you grind. Is it really that straightforward? Or are you just trying to make me feel better about my lack of an anvil?
Oh, it's a trap, Alex. It seems simple until you're at the grinder and you realize your plunge lines are about as straight as a mountain road in a rainstorm. The trick with stock removal is that you're removing mass to find the edge. You have to be incredibly disciplined with your angles. If you lean too hard on that belt, you've just turned $20 of premium steel into a very expensive, very short letter opener.
I remember the first time I tried to grind a bevel. I think I ended up with something that looked more like a flattened spoon than a blade. But you mentioned something interesting. The steel comes annealed. That's a big deal for the stock removal crowd, isn't it?
Huge. It means the steel is soft enough for your files and drills to actually work. If you try to do stock removal on a piece of hardened steel, like an old file you found in the back of a drawer, you're going to have a very frustrating afternoon and a lot of broken drill bits.
So, for the beginner, stock removal is usually the entry point. You don't need a forge, you don't need a 300-pound anvil that costs as much as a used car. You just need a decent grinder, some files, and a lot of patience.
And a lungs full of dust protection. If you're doing stock removal, you're turning literally half your material into fine powder. It's a messy business. But there's a certain satisfaction in the geometry of it. It's very architectural.
Okay, let's pivot to your favorite way to play with fire, forging. To the uninitiated, it looks like you're just hitting hot metal until you get lucky, but there's a lot of talk about compressing the steel or making it tougher. Does hitting it actually make the molecules more athletic?
Don't let the old timers hear you say this, but the whole packing the steel thing is mostly shop talk mythology. You aren't actually squeezing the atoms closer together. If you could compress steel with a hand hammer, you'd be a superhero, not a bladesmith.
I knew it. So why do it? Why sweat over a 2,000-degree furnace when you could just buy a flat bar?
Because forging gives you freedom that a flat bar never will. If I want a knife with a specific curve or a handle that tapers in 3 different directions, I can move the metal there. In stock removal, you're limited by the width of the bar you bought. In forging, I can take a thick, square spike and turn it into a long, elegant blade. It's about moving the mass, not just erasing it.
It feels much more organic, like you're negotiating with the steel instead of just dictating terms.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a conversation, and sometimes the steel tells you to go jump in a lake. You'll be forging along, feeling like a master, and then you hit it just a hair too cold, and tink. You've got a stress crack that goes halfway through the blade. That's a quiet moment in the shop, Alex. Just you, the crack, and the realization that you've just made a very fancy piece of scrap metal.
The heartbreak of the tink. I've seen that look on your face. It's the same look my cat gives me when I accidentally step on his tail. But what about the bad forger comment we saw in those forum posts? That guy who said he was a bad forger, so he stuck to stock removal. Is that really a thing?
Absolutely. Forging is a physical skill, like playing the drums or swinging a golf club. Some people just don't have the hammer hand. They can't get the rhythm, or they overwork the metal. And you know what? That's fine. Some of the greatest blades in the world are made via stock removal. There's no moral superiority in owning an anvil. It's just a different set of tools for the same destination.
Let's talk about the rest of the knife. Because once the blade is done, regardless of how you got there, you still have to make it something you can actually hold without losing a finger. I was looking at that St. Patrick-themed knife build where they used that green Dimilux. It looked incredible, but that stuff is basically resin-soaked wood, right?
Yeah, Demilux is great because it doesn't move. You put it on, you sand it, and it stays put. Natural woods are beautiful, but they're temperamental. I once did a handle in a gorgeous piece of burl, and 2 weeks later, the humidity dropped, the wood shrunk, and the pins were sticking out like little metal thorns.
That's where the mechanical part comes in, right? The pins. I think people assume the glue does all the work, but it's really about those pins holding everything together.
Glue is the backup singer, the pins are the lead vocalist. You want that handle sandwiched so tight that not even a hair could get between the steel and the scale. That's where you see the difference between a maker and a crafter. It's in that transition where the steel ends and the wood begins. It should feel like one continuous piece of material.
Does it drive you crazy when you see a gap?
It keeps me up at night, Alex. I'll be laying in bed thinking about a 0.5 mm gap in a hidden tang handle I did 3 years ago. It's a sickness.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the heat treat. This seems to be where the magic and the most potential for disaster happens. Whether you forge it or grind it, if you don't get the heat treat right, you've just got a knife-shaped object, not a tool.
That's the soul of the knife. You can make the most beautiful blade in human history, but if you don't quench it right, it's just a butter knife. Forging actually gives you an edge here because you can normalize the steel. Every time you hit that metal, you're stressing it out. Normalizing, heating it up, and letting it cool slowly is like giving the steel a spa day. It lets the internal grain structure relax before the big death plunge of the quench.
The death plunge, very dramatic. But for the stock removal folks, they usually send their blades out for heat treating, right?
A lot of them do, and honestly, for beginners, that's a smart move. Professional heat treaters have kilns that can hold a temperature to within 1 degree. I'm out here looking at the color of the steel like I'm trying to read a sunset. Is that cherry red or more of a sunset orange? It's guesswork based on 40 years of mistakes.
I can see the YouTube comments now. Tiger's sunset method for blade hardening.
Hey, it works, but you have to be careful. If you're using something like Damascus, which is layers of 2 different steels, forging is almost a necessity because you're often making your own billets. You're welding those layers together in the forge. If you're doing stock removal with Damascus, you're usually buying a pre-made pattern welded bar, which is essentially a very expensive sandwich.
That etching process is wild. It's like magic ink appearing on the blade.
It's the reveal. That's the moment that makes all the sweat and the burnt arm hairs worth it. You dip it in that acid and suddenly all those layers, 10, 95, 15, and 20, they start talking to each other. The high nickel steel stays bright, the high carbon goes dark. It's the visual history of every hammer blow you landed.
Okay, let's get practical for the listeners. If someone is standing in their garage right now, looking at a bench grinder and a piece of scrap metal, what's the one thing they shouldn't do today?
Don't use a power sander to sharpen your finished edge. I've seen more good knives ruined in 10 seconds by a high-speed belt than by any other method. You'll overheat that tiny, thin edge, ruin the temper, and suddenly you have a blade that won't hold an edge long enough to cut a sandwich. Use a stone. Take your time.
And for the people who want to try forging?
Start with a railroad spike. It's cheap, it's plentiful, and if you mess it up, you just have a slightly flatter railroad spike. You don't need to start with a 40-layer Damascus billet. Learn how the metal moves. Learn how to listen to the sound of the hammer on the anvil.
Listen to the sound. You're getting poetic again, Tiger.
It's the heat, Alex. It gets to your brain. But seriously, whether you're grinding or forging, the most important tool you have is your eyes. Look at the lines, feel the balance. A knife isn't just a tool, it's an extension of the hand. If it doesn't feel right, it doesn't matter how you made it.
I think that's the big takeaway for today. There isn't a better way, just a different way. Forging is the romance, stock removal is the precision. Both require a level of craftsmanship that most people will never understand until they try it themselves.
And both will result in you needing a very large box of Band-Aids. Trust me on that one.
Every lesson learned involves a little bit of tuition in the form of a nicked finger, I suppose.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, you made something. You took a raw material and gave it a purpose. And that, my friend, is why we keep coming back to the den.
Well said. Thanks for joining us in the Tiger Den today, folks. Go out there, make something, and try to keep all your fingers attached.
Check the level on your tables, people. You never know what tools you've hidden under there. See you next time.